From the Man Cave Kinnick Under the Kitchen, authentic, original player art prints are being drawn up for Hawkeye fans everywhere. From Under the Kitchen's Murray Legacy print, which features former Hawkeye Kenyon Murray, current Hawkeye Chris Murray, and current Sacramento King Keegan Murray, to football players Lucas Van Ness, Torrey Taylor, and Cooper DeJean, to wrestlers Tony Cassiope, Alex Marinelli, and Real Woods. Oh, and only one of the greatest athletes to ever compete at Iowa, Spencer Lee. There are so many options available, and they make great gifts. Visit Under the Kitchen on Facebook or at Under the Kitchen's new website. It's underthekitchen.square.site. That's underthekitchen.square.site. Check out Under the Kitchen today and get your authentic, original Hawkeye print. We'd like to welcome everybody to a special edition of Hawkeye Hangout here from the Hawkeye of the Storm, and I'm with a very scruffy Don Patterson on this Sunday afternoon. Coach Patterson, good to see your face as we get closer and closer to turning the corner to August.
At least as best as you can see my face, huh? Let me give a short explanation, Corey. I went in for a dermatology appointment, had a procedure on my face for a non-cancerous non-melanoma cancer, and some stitches that went with that. And of course, they told me I had to be really careful about where I shaved. And I was careful for a couple of days, and I thought, this is kind of stupid. I'm just not going to shave. So I got a little over a week's growth now, and I'll probably shave it all off on Thursday after I have my follow-up appointment.
Well, we're glad to see you're okay, Don, and you grow the beard out as much as you want. You deserve it. And I know you've been working hard to prepare for not only this show, but for the season and providing Kirk Ferentz and the Iowa football staff with helpful analytics, which you've been doing for years. So before we get to Iowa, we got so much to cover. We've got 1 to 2 hours, depending on the interaction we have here. And if we run out of topics early, we've also got a special treat. We're giving away tickets to the Black Keys at the Iowa State Fair Grandstand coming up on August 14th. And I think what we're going to do here, and this is kind of what I was mulling over this afternoon, my goal here, Don, is to give these away once we hit 100 live viewers. So right now we're at about 44 on. So if you want a chance to win tickets to see the Black Keys with the Velveteers opening up for them, certainly share this stream out. Click the like button. That helps us in the algorithm as well. We can get 100 Hawkeye fans on here. We'll give away 2 different pairs to see the Black Keys. 2 different pairs to see the Black Keys at the Iowa State Fair Grandstand. So before we get to that, Don, we're a little over a month away from Iowa football. Big Ten Media Days is officially in the books. Fall camp is just days away. What does it feel like to be back approaching yet another Iowa football season?
It feels good. That's always my favorite time of the year is the fall. It's my busiest time of the year, of course. But I wouldn't want it any other way. There's nothing better than college football on a Saturday afternoon.
So we had several storylines of the past week, one of which being the gambling situation, which is kind of an ongoing thing. We still don't have an official list regarding the Iowa football players that were reportedly involved with gambling that are under investigation. We do know that Noah Shannon admitted not to gambling, but he admitted to being under investigation. And I think it's likely to say, Don, that he's probably I don't think being under investigation in a case like this, I don't think it's hard to surmise the idea that he probably gambled. We'll find that out officially. I'm sure at some point could endanger him as far as playing time. There are other student athletes reportedly involved on the football team. How many players will miss time? Will any miss time? That is all yet to be seen. If you were a coach right now, as we approach fall camp, would you be getting somewhat antsy to get the answers to those unanswered gambling-related questions?
Absolutely, and I don't really fully understand why it would take so long to find out what the particulars are about each of our individuals. And the way I understand the punishment, it's likely that the guys, whoever they are, I think there are 4 of them, is that right? It's likely that they'll miss a game or 2, maybe, depending on the level of their betting. So with a little bit of luck, none of them will miss anything resembling a conference game.
What it will probably affect, and we're just speculating on this, but if players miss 2 games, that Iowa State game is going to be fascinating maybe not for the right reasons, because Iowa State will also likely have some players that are out for that game. If Iowa's missing a couple players, Iowa State will as well. Now, defensive line, I think we could both agree, Don, we're going to run through the positions, run through the depth chart, but defensive line is a position I think they can absorb some attrition or, absence of a guy like Noah Shannon, even though he is a veteran. So we'll talk about that, but I would just have to think as we count down the days here, Kirk and his staff had to have expected this to be wrapped up by now. And the fact that it's not has to make them still a bit uneasy.
Yes, and near as I can tell, our guys were identified through some kind of state of Iowa agency. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I think nationwide players haven't been called out yet, as I recall, from other states. Maybe some states, but certainly not all states.
So, Don, let's talk a little bit about football. We can spend time talking about availability, and of course, we've got a full month of fall camp. We know availability is always a question mark because there's injuries, and that's just the nature of football. But a couple quick notes from Big Ten Media Days, and you and I chatted about this prior to going live. Not really anything involving Iowa. I mean, Kirk Ferentz seemed upbeat. I know he made some comments about the offensive line that tickled the ears of Iowa fans and the Iowa media. But a couple of my big takeaways from this past week are, A, the loss of Nebraska's tight ends coach. As far as a staff change, this is an odd time to lose your tight ends coach. And B, the addition to the Illini staff of former Wisconsin DC Jim Leonhard. Maybe just talk a little bit about both of those situations and how does that affect the race for the West?
Well, to begin with, I have such respect for Jim Leonhard. It's kind of hard for me to imagine, unless he chose to be an analyst, hard for me to imagine that someone wouldn't have an interest in hiring him as a DC. Someone in FBS football, I'm saying, in a Power 5 conference even. That's how much respect I have for him. And I think a lot of people in football circles feel like I do. Now, maybe he simply wanted to rejoin Brett. They have a history together back at Wisconsin. I don't know exactly where Jim was when Brett was coaching there. Brett was his coach maybe for part of his college playing career. I suspect so. Maybe all of it. I don't know. But they obviously have a good relationship, and I would consider him to be a huge resource for an inexperienced defensive coordinator. And the guy that's assumed that role, as I understand it, is young and inexperienced, at least on a DC level. So that's a huge assist, I think, to Illinois for their defense.
Is that kind of an odd dynamic, Don? I know he's young, but Jim Leonhard, who's kind of a veteran DC in this conference and who was a possible head coach heading into this past season. If you're the DC at Illinois, there had to have been some careful thought that went into that from Brett Bielema's stance.
Yeah, I don't know how the dynamics will play out. I don't even know anything about the new DC. Of course, a lot of people would argue that he's now got two bosses. He's got his head coach, who's got a background in defense, and he's got Jim Leonhard. So it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. As you know, Illinois has played outstanding defense, even in Brett's early games at Illinois.
Yeah, I'll be fascinated. I think that's a huge, if you're an Illini fan, huge attaboy to Brett Bielema, because to be able to, however he got him to agree to come in as an analyst, I would think, and this is what Mark Rogers said the other day to me as well, Don, one would think that Jim Leonhard would have been a candidate not only for analyst jobs across the country, but for high major DC jobs, if not Power 5 head coaching jobs, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
So, I don't know if the original plan for Jim Leonhard was to sit on the sidelines this year, take a year off, but the fact, and maybe that's what he did, and he realized, hey, we're getting close to the season. I'm not getting the offers that I want. Let me just jump onto a staff to stick around. Maybe that's what happened, but either way, credit to Brett Bielema for getting him to come on.
Here's what else we don't know. It's entirely possible that one reason he's taken this route is that Wisconsin owes him money for the next year. Obviously, depending on what kind of money he makes wherever he goes. My point is he's going to be able to pay his bills regardless of what Illinois pays him. I suspect. I don't know that, but I suspect he's got that kind of contract remaining with Wisconsin.
But if that's the case, Don, then he could have taken the year off and he'd be making the
True.
exact same. Because if he'd be in the situation that John Budmeyer was reportedly in over a year ago with Iowa, where he's making money from Colorado State, could not make money here, so he's jumped. But see, the difference between Budmeyer and Jim Leonhard, with all due respect to John Budmeyer, Jim Leonhard had the name and the reputation where I think he could probably have afforded to just have taken a year off. And when the next cycle started next year, I'm guessing he would have still been right back there on the candidate list. So it's interesting if he's basically going to work for free, which he kind of would be if he's getting paid from Wisconsin, just to stick around the game. Again, I just find that intriguing. And that was one of I know Mark and I talked a little bit about our takeaways from Big Ten Media Days and how we're feeling about the race. And I haven't come out with my official predictions for the Big Ten West yet, Don. But when you look at the top of the conference,
well, if nothing else, it's a compliment to Brett Bielema. It's clear that Jim Leonhard thinks the world of Brett Bielema.
And Don, when you look at the top of the conference with Wisconsin and Iowa, I think those are the two schools that most people perceive to be 1A and 1B in this conference, at least projecting forward. I feel if I'm an Illinois fan, not just because of Leonhard, but just based on some other prognosticators, I noticed the Big Ten Network seemed rather high on Illinois after media days. That doesn't always mean anything. I thought Brett carried a quiet confidence about him. Now, he kind of always acts that way. He's kind of just a laid-back guy. I think you'd probably attest to that, Don. But I think Illinois is dangerous. And I'm not saying they're going to win the West, but they've got a chance at being good. The question is, can they figure it out at quarterback? They had Tommy DeVito come in last year from Syracuse. They've got Luke Altmaier coming in from Ole Miss this year, who's a dual threat guy, but he's never played here. This is his first year. So question marks there, but you wonder if Brett can do it again at that position, and he's got the guy there, they can be right back there like they were last year.
Yeah. Part of my evaluation process there is a section of that report that deals with what I refer to as positive and negative exceptions. You're familiar with that term, Corey. The listeners maybe not. But the bottom line, if you win a particular parameter that's supposed to all but guarantee a win, if you lose that game, then you would be classified as a negative exception. In other words, the game didn't play out like it was supposed to, and you were the one on the losing end of it. And as another aside, of course, there's a positive exception too. The positive exception is simply a team that seems to have a habit of finding a way to win. And the negative exception, obviously, is a team that seems to find a way to lose. Illinois last year, despite doing a lot of good things, was pretty high on that negative exception end. They lost a couple of games. It was kind of difficult to understand how they lost them, frankly. A little bit unlucky. That's part of the solution for winning, of course, is to have an element of luck on your side. And the bottom line, if Brett can get that straightened out in year two, then I think you're right. They could certainly be capable of beating anyone, in part because they tend to play outstanding defense and not give up a lot of points.
And Don, which team in the Big Ten West challenged the Big Ten champion Michigan Wolverines the most?
You're right.
It was Illinois.
As I recall, I'm pretty sure that Michigan actually came from behind in the fourth quarter to beat them.
Yeah, they did. And that was shortly after, was it Brett Bielema? Did he lose his mother the week prior? Am I correct in saying that?
I think you might be right. Yeah, it was 1917, as I recall.
Yeah, incredible effort by Illinois. They're dangerous, and they've got, we have to talk about Iowa's schedule. Wisconsin's got a favorable schedule. You know who else has a favorable schedule? And that's Illinois. Listen to their crossover games, Don. Okay. Home against Indiana, at Maryland, challenging game. And then their third one is home against Penn State. So Maryland's a difficult game, but they get Penn State at home, and Indiana might be the worst team in the conference.
Right.
That's a favorable schedule. To get Wisconsin at home, they do have to come to Kinnick, and they have to go to Minnesota. But I don't know. It'll be an interesting race. I'm a little bit higher on Purdue as well. I thought Ryan Walters was impressive in his media availability. I do wonder what that offense will look like, because we've just seen what the Purdue offense has been like seems like forever with Coach Braum. He's moved on to Louisville. They bring in Hudson Card, who looked the part at Texas. and they brought in some transfers at receiver and some pieces, but I mean, that's just going to be a totally different looking team, very similar to Wisconsin.
Yeah, addressing Illinois again too, Corey. I just flashed back on a couple of stats that'll impress you. As you know, turnover margin is always a good stat to have on your side. Number one team in the Big Ten for turnover margin was Illinois last year. Here's another one that might surprise you. Red zone scoring defense. As you know, Iowa has always been near the top in allowing very few points, even if teams do make it to the red zone. The number one team last fall in red zone scoring defense, again, was Illinois. So that's just a couple of stats that, of course, are nice to have on your side. And they lost some games maybe that they really can't understand how they lost, but if they can get that corrected, then they're dangerous against anyone.
And your thoughts on Purdue, Don?
I think of all the coaching changes, I think that's the one that's going to have the hardest time to work out in a really positive way for the new coach. And I'm not being critical at all of the new coach. I'm simply making the observation, of course, that they lost a quarterback that had been a proven performer for them, and incidentally could have stayed around for another year, as I recall. They lost a tight end that could have stayed around for another year or two. And then last but not least, they lost a guy named Charlie Jones, who turned out to be pretty good for them last fall too. So significant losses on offense, and another significant loss is a play caller by the name of Jeff Brom. So that's why I suspect that Purdue is going to take a tumble. And it sounded like some of the experts that voted on the preseason rankings felt that same way. I believe Purdue was maybe ranked 5th or 6th overall. Is that right?
Yeah, they're toward the bottom.
Yeah, they were picked low. Nobody would have the guts to pick them lower than Poor Northwestern right now. That's another discussion that we might have before the 2 hours is up. But I think Illinois has their work cut out for them, in part because of graduation losses, but also they lost a really fine head coach.
All right, Don, let's shift our attention to Iowa. And we got depth charts last week. We don't need to, I've spent so much time looking at the depth chart piece by piece, talking about it on this very show. But let's just talk about each side of the football and kind of just general reactions from the depth chart. I'm sure you're not reading too far into what we saw on Black and White here a few days ago. And this is typical for a preseason depth chart. Kirk Ferentz always downplays that release. But I guess a couple takeaways for me, and then I'll throw it to you, Don. A little bit intrigued by the fact that, or not intrigued, but surprised maybe that Deacon Hill was listed behind Joe Labus at quarterback after the spring we saw. But I also acknowledge the fact that if either one of those guys was at risk for transferring anytime soon, it'd probably be Joe Labus because Hill just got here. So I'm not saying Kirk Ferentz is being disingenuous by listing Labus second. But if he throws Labus in third place after Hill just got here, I would not be shocked to see Labus leave. That backup quarterback battle will play out throughout fall camp. I think they're really solid at running back. We've talked about that. They're really solid at tight end. There's a lot of people who have played along that offensive line, Don. A lot of people. The excuses to me are out the door about youth anymore. Most of these guys are going into at least year 3. You've got an experienced grad transfer in Rusty Feth. And Dejon Parker, who looks the part physically, has not played D1 ball, but looks the part physically and was wanted by other Power 5 schools, decommitted from Virginia to come to Iowa City. And then you look at fullback. They've got a 6'5" former tight end in Hayden Large, who is talk about looking the part. I don't know that I've ever seen a fullback that looked that big and tall. That's intriguing to me. Obviously, the big question with this offense is wide receiver play and offensive line play. Wide receiver play, they bring in transfers, Caleb Brown, Seth Anderson. They bring in 3 true freshman scholarship players in Jarrett Bowie, Dayton Howard, and Alex Moda. None of those guys, those newcomers, any of the 3 freshmen, neither of the 2 transfers, none of them are on the depth chart. You've got 2 walk-ons on the depth chart, plus a redshirt sophomore, Jacob Bostic, who really didn't play at all last year. What are your biggest takeaways from looking at that offensive depth chart?
Well, one question I have, and as you mentioned, is it Labus or is it Hill? I know one thing, we better figure out who the backup is because the backup has to be ready to go. Let me give you a dilemma that we might face even on September 2nd. Is it hard to imagine that we might be off to a good start against Utah State, that the score might be, I don't know, let's just say 28-7, 28-7 at the end of 3 quarters. And logically, at that point in that game, with our defense playing the way they play, that's a very safe lead. And there'd be a logical temptation to pull the starting quarterback and get one of those backups some experience. But the question is, how does the contract factor in? How does the fact that maybe it'd be a good idea to get more than 28 points?
So just want to establish this. You're the one who brought up the contract. We hadn't even gotten to that yet. You're the one who brought up the contract, Don. So
it must be this facial hair that's causing me to act so strange. I don't know. But I'm just,
fair point.
I'm just being, that's a little element of comedy maybe to the show. Seriously, it could be an issue. What do you do at that point? You'd like to ring up some more points, but let's face it, the backup needs playing time, whoever he is. Neither one of them's played much at all. And then on top of that, of course, if you leave a starter in, clearly he's already played 3/4 of a game. He's more susceptible to injury as he gets a little bit tired maybe than the reserve might be, who hadn't played all day, especially on a warm September day. It's entirely possible we'll have that. So I'm hoping that we'll get off to a good start and put up some points, and that our coaches will be comfortable giving at least one of those 2 backups some playing time. Hopefully we're in a position to do that in game 1.
All right, folks, here's the deal. Our phone line is open, 515-635-1601, 515-635-1601. You can also join by means of StreamYard. You don't have to have your camera on if you don't want to, but those are 2 different ways to call in. And once we get to 100 live viewers, we will ask our trivia question, which Don Patterson has prepared well for us. It's Hawkeye related, and I think it's a great question. We're going to use the honor system, folks. No Googling, no Binging, no asking Alexa. Please play by the rules. Of course, we can't enforce that because we are not in your homes. But again, try to please use ethical behavior and play by the rules. So we'll have that trivia question once we hit 100 viewers. We're about 91 people on right now. And again, the link to join the show is in the description. I threw it up in the live chat as well. All right, Don, let's move to the defense before we start taking calls. I think this defense has an opportunity to be as good as last year, and I know that's saying a lot because this is one of the best units Phil Parker has had. You look at guys like Jack Campbell, Seth Benson, Kayvon Merriweather was a veteran in the back end, and they lose all those guys. Plus, they lose a veteran, Riley Moss. They lose a first-round draft pick in Lucas Van Ness. Am I delirious to think that this defense could be as good as it was last year?
I think there's certainly a chance of that. I think one key to whether or not we can get that done is simply this. Nick Jackson needs to be as productive for Iowa as he was last fall for Virginia. If Nick Jackson can do that, that simply means he's clearly made his way into the starting lineup. If he can perform like a starter and be a productive player as he was last fall for Virginia, then I do think that we'll be in solid enough shape with Higgins as a likely other linebacker. We need to get outstanding productivity out of those 2 inside backers. We've had it in the past. It's been something we've had pretty routinely through the years. Seth has done a good job in terms of coaching, and we need him to do that again. I'm sure he will. And those linebackers this fall need to be hopefully almost as productive as the ones we had last fall.
And special teams, Don, I mean, what can you say about LeVar Woods other than he seems to figure it out each and every year? And again, I think this is one of the strongest kicking units that he's had, and he's had some really good ones. You think about place kickers, Caleb Shudak, Keith Duncan, Miguel Racinos. You go down the list, and now you've got one in Drew Stevens that he's going into his true sophomore year, but boy, he was sensational last year. Torrey Taylor's back for an extra season as well. They don't have any changes at long snapper or holder. Talk about special teams, how important it is at this university.
Let me talk about it, too, in terms of average starting field position. One of the parameters that made the biggest jump from 2 years ago compared to last year was average starting field position. And to go one step further, it's really interesting to hear this and to realize it was true. As I started charting all it out, Corey, I couldn't. The winning percentage of every starting field position in the first season was not nearly the same as it was when it got cooler in November. Average starting field position became even more important as the season went on. Or to be specific, the first 30 games of the year, conference games I'm saying, our winning percentage was 73% if you won on average starting field position. Any kind of edge, might have been a yard or two, might have been 5 or 10. But any kind of edge on average starting field position, you won the game 73% of the time. The last 34 games of the regular season, that percentage jumped all the way up to 91%. So in November, it was almost a guarantee to win the game if you had an edge on average starting field position. I just thought it was interesting how much it changed from October to November. And of course, some conference games in there in September also.
Don, this is, and I know this has been, we've discussed it, but this has been a difficult month for Iowa fans, and I didn't want to just keep going with football before we addressed it. The passing of Cody Ince, we were talking about the offensive line, that kind of jolted my memory to that.
I lost you there for a minute, Corey.
Can you hear me, Don?
Yeah, I lost you for maybe 10 seconds.
Just wanted to address real quickly before we moved on the passing of Cody Ince. I know that's been on the minds of Hawkeye fans here of late. Can you just speak to how tragic that is, and maybe your experience? I'm sure, unfortunately, you probably lost a player, or certainly you've lost former players. How difficult is that as a coaching staff?
Amazing enough, in 37 years of coaching, Corey, never lost one while he was playing, never even lost one shortly after he was finished playing. So I've been really lucky in that regard. Just law of averages would suggest you probably lose one somewhere along the way. But these young men are so committed, and I know Cody was too, so committed to what they're doing. When they leave us, they really do feel like they're part of your family. So I know the ties between Cody and our football coaches and players are strong, and always will be. And it's just tragic when any young person loses their life. And I just hate to see it happen. And on top of all that, of course, I understand he was engaged to be married. I don't know what kind of wedding date was set, but it's just a terrible bit of bad. And it's hard to understand why these things happen, but who are we to say? I know the one thing I was always able to tell players who lost loved ones, especially if it was unexpected, the only thing I could think to tell them is that remind them it was God's way of reminding us that every day's a gift, and you need to make them all count. And that should be a good goal for all of us. And we're only human. We're not going to always make them count. But I always used to like to say to the players, if you have a few days that are not very productive in a row, you need to have an intervention. You need to change that, because that's not the way to live your life. Why would you cheat yourself or your loved ones out of anything but your best effort? And I'm just really saddened to know about the loss of a young man that certainly didn't deserve to die at such a young age.
And to address this comment from Ari Gold, does anyone know how Cody Ince died yet? No, and why does it matter?
I don't have any idea.
I think that question's a little bit inappropriate, frankly. Roger, great show, Corey. Welcome back, Don. Don is the man. I agree with that. And Kevin, with a very valid question here, Don. What happens if Cade gets injured? What do you do? I think the all caps must indicate some level of perhaps panic in that, kind of foreseeing what could happen. What did you see from Deacon Hill this spring to make you think, Don, that he could come in and fill that void, or did you see anything from either guy?
Well, I only saw one spring practice, and that was the last one, the open scrimmage, if you will. And the thing I noticed watching Deacon for the first time, big, strong guy with a good, strong arm. Of course, I've seen a lot of those through the years. My biggest concern watching him just that one day, and it's really hard to evaluate based on the fact that we're not going to let him run around and be hit. I was a little concerned about his escapability. I don't know how well he runs. I suspect he's, to be optimistic, average escapability. I don't know that it would be any higher than that. I'm afraid it might be lower than that. But a good, strong arm, that's a plus. But the question, of course, is, let's say it this way. A productive quarterback right now in the Big Ten or in FBS football is a guy that has the capability to extend plays. And that was part of Spencer's issue. He wasn't very athletic in terms of avoiding a pass rush. And I suspect that it might be a little bit the same case with Deacon. Now, I don't doubt for a second he's working hard this summer to improve that speed and quickness. But anyway, you slice it, he's not an agile, small guy that can run around and make people miss. He's not that type of quarterback, and we shouldn't expect him to be. But having said that, I'm sure that he's working as best he can to develop more escapability maybe than what he had last fall or what he had in the spring. Hopefully he's going to show up a little bit lighter for camp. I don't doubt that for a second. And hopefully that lighter weight will carry forward throughout the fall, because I suspect he'll at least be able to extend plays a little bit better if he's a few pounds lighter than what I saw him in the spring. And then there's Joey. I'll just discuss Joey based on the Kentucky game. I thought that we were smart with what we did in the Kentucky game, especially the way we played it out. And it was simply this case. Defense gave us a couple of scores, and for sure, if not sooner than then, somewhere along the way, maybe even before the game, the coaches made the decision, we're not going to give Joey very much rope because we do not want him to hang himself. We're going to ask him to do very few things and do those things he does really well. The first thing we have to do is not beat ourselves, and we're not going to give Joey a chance to beat Iowa. We didn't give him much to do, and he certainly handled it well enough. And, of course, our defense played lights out, and it was a routine win. So going forward, the only concern I have, if we have to ask Joey to play bold football in Cade's absence, and we certainly we hope that doesn't happen, of course. But if we have to ask him to run our entire offense, is he going to be prepared to do that? I don't know. My fear is that neither one of them is nearly prepared to run the entire offense as Cade is. And, of course, that's the priority for them in the month of August. You better improve a lot as a football player from one day to the next, because your team's counting on you to be ready to replace Cade if and when it happens.
Real quick, before we move, we got James waiting online to jump on here. Let me address this comment one more time. Why is it inappropriate to ask? Because it's not your business. So if the family wants to say what happened with Cody Ince, they can say that. But I can tell you, if a family member of mine passed away, it's not going to be everybody's business how he died. And it's, again, there's nothing more personal that we could possibly draw up. So I'm not going to address it any further. But again, if people want us to, if the family wants the public to know how their son or their brother or whatever the case may be passed away at the far too young age of 23, they will say so. Other than that, I would ask that you respect the privacy of the family. All right, let's get to our first caller who is on the line. James, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. Don, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
You're looking great, man.
Don't know about that. I look like I might be in the doghouse with my wife. Maybe she locked me out of the house.
That's not good. So, how do you think our depth at running back looks this year?
It looks good. I think we have three guys that can perform. You've always heard me say, you better have at least a very, very strong 2 deep. And ideally, you got three guys you can believe in, because the beauty of that, of course, is you never, ever have to play with a tired running back. Hopefully, we're in that position. I suspect we will be to start the season at least. We'll have confidence in maybe our second and our third back. And if it's a really hot, humid day on September 2nd, I'm sure you'll see all three of them out there as the game plays itself out.
And one more thing. What about offensive line? I know last year offensive line looked like it was kind of hit and miss last year. Do you think that we're set to improve on from last year to this year?
Well, our two transfers, I'd say as a bare minimum, those guys have to be, at the very least, really, really strong backup players. I'd like to think they'll crack the starting lineup. I don't know if that'll happen, but that's certainly a realistic goal. That's why they came here, is to get that done. I do know that. So they're going to be given every opportunity to become starters, and with a little bit of luck, they'll deserve to both be starting for us. even if they're only strong backups, even if they share time with somebody else that was already here, that's still okay because that means we'll have more quality depth than we had a year ago or even 2 years ago. And that's important, especially in a warm month like September. And let's face it, we play Penn State in Game 4. We play Iowa State in Game 2. Those are both important games, of course, not that the other two are not. But let's face it, we have to be bare minimum. We have to have 8 players that can play winning football in our O-line. You've always heard me say, bare minimum, you need to have a quality backup center that can replace the starter. You need to have it as a minimum 3 guards, one of which has to be able to play both left and right. And also, of course, you have to have 3 tackles, one of which can play left and right. That's the bare minimum. You got to have 8 guys that can play winning football. I think that's a very realistic goal for our offensive line. With a little bit of luck, we might even hit the number 9 or 10. I think 10 is probably unrealistic. I know even when Kirk was our offensive line coach, he used to comment sometimes his goal was always to have 8 guys that could play championship football. And our thought was that very few teams in college football ever had as many as 10. If you had 8, you could survive, as long as one could, of course, play both left and right at both guard and tackle.
All right, and that one thing I think that, at least it seems to me, is going unnoticed is like it seems like this year we're decently deep at the tight end position. What do you think about that?
I'm sorry, say that again. I got distracted for a second.
The tight end position this year, it seems like we're pretty deep at tight end, where past couple of years it didn't seem like we were quite as deep.
Well, it's rare that
well, I think we were pretty darn deep last year.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to be deep again. I think Sam was one of my favorite players, of course, and I do understand he's really putting on a show with Detroit. The lines look very, very smart to have taken Sam Laporta, and I'm not surprised in the least that he's off to a great start. That's what I would expect out of Sam. But I do think that Eric is going to come in and give us quality play. He's certainly going to challenge Luke. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they end up pretty much sharing time. And that's okay, because that means, again, we can always have a really fresh tight end out there too. And, of course, there'll be times when they're both out there at the same time. And then Corey knows more about the backups than I do. The third teamer looks pretty promising too. So I'm excited about him for how he's played last spring.
I don't think we know we don't know who the third teamer is. That's what's intriguing about this. Is it Steven Stilianos or is it Addison Estringa? I think both those guys have potential to contribute. Steven Stilianos' clock is ticking a little bit faster because this is his last year after transfer.
But you're right. They're compelling backups, because it's entirely possible that when they get their opportunity, they'll perform really well. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they did that.
Do you think that it's possible this year we might have a TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant type situation this year?
Yes. Now, I don't know that they're going to be quite as athletic as those two. Those two guys, of course, have been pretty special even in the NFL. But I do think they both know how to play winning football, and they can make plays for us all day long, those two tight ends. They can be effective as blockers, and they can catch pretty much everything they get their hands on. They've proven that. So that's a good combination. Go ahead, Corey. I know you're anxious to contribute.
I was just going to say, maybe I'm just buying into the hype train, but Eric All is one of the more athletic tight ends that I've seen. And I we haven't seen him yet after the back injury, but I'm just saying, I don't know, athleticism collectively, maybe the Hawkinson-Fant tandem was more athletic than the All-Lachey tandem will be. I don't know where you would rate Lachey's athleticism. I did see Pro Football Focus, and you and I always kind of take jabs at Pro Football Focus, but I did see that one of their analysts had Luke Lachey as their third best tight end in the 24 draft class. And I just about fell out of my seat because he hasn't even started yet. Right. And I have no doubt he's got an opportunity to be an NFL tight end, but that just shocked me. And, that's
based on his body of work up until now, that would be a little bit of a reach to put him that high. He simply played a little bit in Sam's shadow last year, and that's not an indictment of Luke at all. Because Sam was a great player.
Yeah. So
Alrighty.
Go ahead, James.
I was gonna say, Corey, I'm gonna get off here and go check on my pork butt I got on the smoker and let you guys and just listen to the show.
All right, sir. We appreciate you calling in.
Alrighty.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, I think the Eric All-Noah Fant comparison is intriguing because of how those two guys run. Like, I watched Noah Fant in the league, Don, and ever since he went into the league, 2 years ago, I feel like he's been underutilized. I think he's had unfortunate situations in Denver and in Seattle with quarterbacks that aren't the best and play callers that have not gotten him the ball effectively. He is special, and he does not run like a tight end. And what I've seen from Eric All, he didn't really run like a tight end either. He kind of runs like a receiver in a tight end's body, and that's what's intriguing to me. And that's why I never bought into the Laporta, Lachey. People were saying this exact thing a year ago, Don, that Laporta and Lachey were going to be the next Hawkinson fan. There is a difference because I think All and Lachey play differently. And although Laporta is, I think, going to be a fabulous NFL tight end, he was more of the Hawkinson type of runner. I don't think he had the athletic, that he didn't have the speed that like a Noah Fant had. Neither does Lachey for that matter. But I think this tandem has the opportunity to kind of be the bread and butter, like Hawkinson Fant did in 2018. So anyways, let's go to our next caller. James is on the line. James, welcome to the show.
James to James transition, I guess.
James to James.
How you doing? How you doing, Don?
I'm doing well, James. How about you?
I'm doing all right. First off, about the quarterback thing, and you did bring it up earlier, but I do feel like it's important with the transfer portal. Does it make it even more inevitable kind of to play your backups in, like when you're kind of like beating somebody? So like if you're up like 44-3, you know, or whatever, or not 44-3, but like 28-3 or something. Like, is it more effective to play your backups, being scared that they? I know you're not thinking they're going to transfer, but like as a fan, do you think we would think it's more likely that to play them so they don't transfer, so we don't lose as much? Because I feel like not playing Padilla in some situations is kind of why he left. If that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. To me, there's another reason that gets overlooked sometimes about why you play the backup. You play the backup so you don't get your starter injured. What is more foolish than injuring a starter when the outcome of the game's already settled?
For sure, and I feel like last year it made it more weird because it was like it felt like they didn't trust anybody but Spencer, but yet they keep leaving Spencer in those situations late in the game where he could risk getting injured. And I didn't understand that. I was like, why you keep leaving him in? If it seems like it's the only guy that you trust, why do you keep leaving him out there for a chance to get injured?
You're right. There was that infamous game that lasted 7 hours that had 3 weather delays. And I think the only backup that did not play in that game was the backup quarterback for us. I think everybody else got to play. The backup quarterback, for whatever reason, was not allowed to play.
For sure. And I just feel like that's probably the reason why. Like, and I'm not saying obviously we got Kate out of it, so it worked, right? But like, you never know what's going to happen at quarterback, you know, especially at Iowa. You don't know if we're going to be able to get somebody, you know, to be a replacement or something. So you don't want to do what could cause you to risk something. I feel like that's at every position too. Like some positions you're deeper than others. But like I feel like sometimes getting the backup reps, and even you don't know too, because if somebody does go down, like I think it's what hurt Padilla last year too, is he didn't get a lot of reps. So when he had to play, he was a little rusty because he wasn't playing a lot. He didn't play when he needed to in situations like that.
I think you're right, and I do know it matters a lot to those players. The players, maybe their parents think they should be starting, but the players in so many cases know better. They're the ones in practice every day. They see that guy playing ahead of them, and they know that he's playing at a higher level than they are. Most of them know that. They understand that. They're still committed to being the best player they can be, even if it's only in a backup role. And it wouldn't be hard for you to imagine when you have a chance to play them, for God's sakes, play them, because it's good for their morale. It's good for team morale. And not to mention it's fun for the starters to watch their understudies out there playing. And they're glad to see them play well too, because they realize that's part of the secret of having a great team is having great depth. And you got to build that depth by giving them playing time. That's how you build their ability to play.
Okay. Question. What do you think is the most deep position on both sides of the football? So what do you think is the most deep position on offense and the most deep position on defense? Like
the deepest position on defense would be D-line.
Yeah,
That's an easy.
I don't even think that's close.
That's an easy decision for me. Offensively, I'd probably say running back.
Really?
I don't know who our fourth running back would be, but at least we have three that I think are
Probably
good.
would it be Terrell Washington Jr.?
You would take running back over tight end?
Well, you're right. I forgot. You're right. You could argue tight ends the deepest position. How could I forget tight ends?
I feel like
okay, tight end and running back. I have that.
I do agree with you. I feel like they're kind of about even on the offensive side of the ball with the running back and the tight end room. And obviously with hopefully Noah doesn't miss a lot of times, but if he does have to, for the unfortunate circumstance, we at least feel more comfortable having depth at that position, if that makes sense, when he does miss time. So I feel like it's still a big loss, but it's not as big of a loss as it could be. Like if Iowa State were to lose Deckers, that's a way bigger loss than it would be. I feel like us losing Shannon because we have more back that I feel like we trust.
Well, it's also a difference between defensive tackle and a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I know I probably shouldn't put it that way, but I'm saying like some teams have backups a little bit that they trust. Like last year's situation where like Penn State, if they had to go to Aller isn't great, but you at least can trust Aller. You know what I mean? Like I think you can trust Aller more than you could trust most backup quarterbacks in the nation. Some teams do have backup quarterbacks like that. So I feel like it's obviously quarterback's not as deep because you don't have as many. But I don't think Iowa State. I mean Levi, who knows? He wasn't making sense, but he might trust Rocco Brecht or JJ Cole. But I don't think I would if I was in their situation.
So Don, I'm just curious. Let's piggyback on that topic from James. The defensive line. You've got 8 guys who you trust right now, maybe more. And I think there's potential for more. I think a guy like Jeremiah Pittman could emerge this year. I think Ontario Thompson, who's not listed on the depth chart but transferred in from Iowa Western, that he's got a chance. But I mean, if you were to name a starting 4 right now, let's just play that game for a second, Don. Who's the starting defense, regardless of what the depth chart says? Who's the starting 4 right now?
I'm not sure. I am absolutely not sure. I don't think our defensive line coach knows for sure yet.
Well, it's probably.
I think it's up for grabs.
Reasonable to think that assuming Shannon is available, you're gonna have Shannon and Lee next to each other, and then Joe Evans and Deontay Craig, right? I mean,
probably based on playing time last fall, yeah.
But my point of bringing this up is, would it be a shock to anybody if Aaron Graves by season's end is starting somewhere? Would it be a shock?
I'm an Aaron Graves fan. I like that kid. He's going to be a really good player.
And Y.A. Black I mean, talk about maybe some untapped potential. He's one of the biggest guys I've ever stood next to at the college level, and he's listed as a backup on the depth chart. You've got Ethan Herkett, who's had plenty of playing time. I mentioned Ontario Thompson, Jeremiah Pittman. It's and I know I'm missing. Am I missing people, Don? Let me look at the.
You know the depth chart better than I do.
Here's the depth chart. Who did I not? Well, Max Llewellyn has played. Yeah,
he was on the depth chart, wasn't Llewellyn? Yeah,
Llewellyn is on the depth chart as well. So, and who knows? We don't know what we had guys that came in like Caden Crawford, who came in during the 22 class. You never know. Sometimes you see true freshmen get in there and get a few snaps. They've got so much depth back there, James, that I think that the Noah Shannon, although you don't want to hear about a veteran player, a guy who's a starter, could potentially miss time due to an infraction with gambling. If there's any position that you could sustain it at, it's defensive line.
And I feel like that's what's made us so good on defense. I mean, obviously there's other pieces like Jack Campbell and stuff, but like the depth of the defensive line, like they're not getting tired because you have so much depth behind them that you keep rotating them in, and you have certain situations where you know what's best for them. Like certain people on third down are better than other people, So I feel like that's what's made it better too, is the fact that you have fresh pass rushers to get there, and then you have Jack and then behind it who can kind of just seal it off.
Corey, this is the perfect time for me to address this fact. There's another parameter that is trending upward in recent years, and it's highest it's ever been based on last fall, and that would be edge on defensive sacks. Now, we've been historically good on defense. The only negative for us is that we've given up too many sacks the last couple of years. I have a lot of confidence in saying with maybe an improved offensive line and a more mobile quarterback that sack total that other teams register against us is going to be smaller than it has been in the past. And that's a good stat to have on our side, that we have not always won. Even though we've sacked the opponent, they've also sacked us. And that is a good stat to have on your side. Most coaches do feel a sack is defined as a drive killer. So often sacks, of course, occur on third down because you're more likely to be in a passing situation on third down anyway than on first and second down. And of course, after third down comes a punt on fourth down if you're sacked on third down, probably. So I think it's safe to say if we can win on sacks, that's a good stat to have on our side because it does produce a high percentage of winning football.
All right, one more question before I get off. I'm gonna flip it now. It says strongest. What do you think is the weakest or the position that scares you the most on each side of the ball? I think I know your answers. I'm just intrigued by what it would be.
Position that scares us on both sides of the ball.
Oh,
is that what you said, James?
Yeah. Like, what do you think is the weakest or the position that scares you the most on each side?
Well, that scares me the most would probably be offensive line, although my concern is equally as strong regarding the receiver. Because, Don, I think it's fair to say if the offensive line can't block, it doesn't matter what the receivers are doing to some extent, right? You got to be able to run the football. You got to be able to give Cade time. So
let's face it, that's 45% of your starting lineup.
Yeah.
Or 46% maybe. So, it's hard to operate without five good guys that are numbered 50 to 79. You need guys that can perform. As you've heard me say before, Corey, you can have an All-American center. All that really means is that he's going to block his guy pretty much all day long. But that only allows us to account for one of those defensive linemen. Can we block the other three with those other four blockers that we have on our offensive line? The point is you can't have a breakdown across the line of scrimmage anywhere because so often if one guy's beaten, it does affect the outcome of the play. It's either a sack or the quarterback is forced to pull the ball down and run.
Anything else, James?
Nope. All right. Enjoy your guys' night and excited for the season to start. Hopefully we can have a good year. Been seeing a lot of people say that they think we're going to lose. Not us in particular, but more media people that think they know college football that are saying we're going to lose Iowa State. And I don't really understand that one, but hopefully we can get them because
I don't know what that's based on. It's just
I don't know either. I just see a lot of people when they predict the schedules and stuff they're predicting us to lose Iowa State, and I'm like, I don't. I understand we lost last year, but we also
it's on the road. I have no doubt it could very well be a close game, but as of right now, I favor Iowa somewhat heavily, given the fact that it's on the road. I wouldn't favor it as heavily as a normal year, but I mean, Don, I'd say right now, if the line came out, Iowa's probably 5-point favorites.
Well, if you want to talk about momentum from one season to the next, then we clearly have more momentum. We won our bowl game. They didn't go to one.
Yeah.
They had momentum back in September when they knocked us off, but it didn't last, of course.
But all right, enjoy your guys' night, and I'll be here for the rest of it. Make sure you leave a like on the video, by the way, everybody that's listening as well.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it, sir. All right. We've got a couple callers on hold. We're going to put our caller on the phone line on hold as well. And here's what's going to happen. We've got 121 people on here, so it's time to give away a couple of tickets to the Black Keys, Don. And before we do that, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, and that, of course, is Ascent Nutrition. They've been with us for a long time, and I'll show you their website here. If you haven't checked out the GoAscentNutrition.com website, be sure to do that. Scroll down and look at their many products. So many great options to better your health. Start your ascent today with Ascent Nutrition. You can shop their many products right here on the homepage. But how about their agarikon mushroom and their lion's mane mushroom? Both of these products have shown tremendous ability to help immune system health, gut health, etc. You can read all about the positive effects of their new mushroom products by visiting GoAscentNutrition.com. So much information. You can read customer reviews and, again, look at their related products. And just so many great testimonies of how these products have helped people deal with problems that they have been facing for a long period of time. And who doesn't need a better immune system? Again, better digestive health, blood sugar support is another benefit of these products. And you can use the code Hawkeyes at checkout for 15% off your order. So when you're here on the Go Ascent Nutrition website, you click checkout. if you're buying this or you're buying a couple different products. And then, of course, as you scroll down, you enter your information and you'll enter the code Hawkeyes right here on the right. Again, that's the code Hawkeyes for 15% off your order. You'll click apply. And that's the benefit, the perk of being a listener here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Again, we appreciate Lance Shuttler and Ascent Nutrition for sponsoring the show. Visit goascentnutrition.com for more information. All right. Well, Don, I'm going to let you introduce this. And here's how we're going to do this. We've got a couple people on the phone line. So we're going to give our callers on the phone line first crack at our trivia question. I don't know if they called in for the trivia question or not, but if they did, I want to give them an opportunity to answer it. So let's get our first caller on the phone line. Thank you for calling Hawkeye Hangout here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Who's on the line? Hello.
Hey, it's Brian.
Hey, Brian. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to, Brian, do you have a question for Coach, or do you want to take a shot at our trivia questions for the tickets?
Oh, I couldn't hear the show, but I'll take a shot at the trivia question. But I do have a question.
Go ahead with the question, then we'll throw you the trivia question.
Okay. Well, before I say anything else, I want to say somebody called in a bit ago and said, what position is weakest on each side of the ball? I want to point out offensively, it would be the offensive coordinator. I'm struggling a little bit as a fan because at the end of the season last year, I was so angry. I mean, just disgusted. But part of being a Hawk fan is, the season turns over and you want to go in optimistically and feeling like things maybe have changed. I do want to ask this. It's looking backward a little bit, but it's for you and Coach. When you look back last year at the situation with our wide receivers and our offensive line, and with maybe Spencer not developing as good as he could, would you quantify how much of the blame a guy like me should be putting on Brian for the offensive performance versus and I hate to use the word blame with kids because these are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, but how much of it was the play calling and philosophy versus how much of it was just the development or lack thereof of the athletes?
That's a good question. Don, you want to take first shot at that?
Well, coaches feel, the definition of a coach, of course, is he can maybe enable a young man to play better than what he could imagine. That's the definition of great coaching, enabling a player to actually perform at a level that they didn't dream they could do. And that's very difficult to do, but that's your goal. And every now and then you feel like you get that done. Obviously, if they don't play up to their abilities, then that's an indictment of you as a coach. So I think the responsibility for that really is shared between player and coach. They both invested in it, and they both have a role to perform. And frankly, you could point out that both those positions should have been able to find a way to perform better than what they did last fall. Maybe that sounds like a lame answer that I'm blaming both sides equally, but I think there's blame in both spots.
Okay, well, let me kind of.
And of course, that doesn't even address the fact that the O-line, of course, has to contribute to that too. So it's never one person's fault. It's always shared among many.
And I just want to make sure I heard you correct, caller. Your name is Brian?
Yes. Yeah.
And we're talking about Brian Ferentz, right?
Yeah, my name personally is Brian.
Okay.
But I am talking about Brian Ferentz.
But you're not Brian Ferentz, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's what I would say. This is from a totally different perspective of Don, not being a coach like Don Patterson was, but from my perspective as the average Joe, when I look at struggles with play calling and I look at struggles with development and, guys aren't executing up front. Wide receivers aren't getting separation. Your quarterback is, well, I don't even know what to say because I don't want to attack Spencer any more than we have. And this is obviously not a 1 year thing. This has been an issue for quite a long period of time. These last 2 years have been historically bad. But what's the common denominator? And some would say it's Kirk Ferentz. Although the offense has, we don't have to debate this today, but the offense has been worse over the last 2 years than it's ever been under Kirk. And so I just hesitate, Brian, to ever blame players. And I know you said the same thing, but when you're looking at issues across the board, if players don't have the right attitude or they don't have the right players here, either way, who does that fall back on? That falls back on the coaching staff. Because either you're not coaching these players well enough, you're not developing them well enough, or you're not recruiting the right players. All of it comes back to you as a coach. You have to be accountable. And so I totally understand where you're coming from when you talk about struggling with Brian and struggling with Kirk. I have turned over a new leaf as it relates to this coming season because I appreciate Kirk Ferentz for what he is, and doesn't mean I'm not frustrated with him for not making changes that I feel were right for the program. But there's a lot of young men in this program who really want to win. And I hope that they go 12-0. But I also understand struggling with wanting to see this type of behavior enabled, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the tough part for me is it's like an accountability issue, right? And so on one hand, I'm very proud of Kirk and like what he's done for the program, and the way that Iowa's gone about doing it. It's very Iowa-like. But when it comes to accountability, which is like a core thing that I'm sure they're teaching their players, it seems like there's a lot of that lacking when it comes to answering for this offensive performance. And it's sometimes it's met with denial, which really, really turns me off as a fan.
Oftentimes it's met with
insulting
denial.
My intelligence.
Oftentimes it's met with denial. In fact, Kirk Ferentz, we're not going to turn this into a rip fest, but Kirk Ferentz was quoted this past week as saying that the Iowa offensive numbers were pretty good offensively. That's a quote. Until the last couple of years. That's just hogwash. They have not been pretty good offensively until the last couple of years. They've been below average almost the entire length of Kirk's tenure. Relative to the 2 years ago and the last 2 years, Don, they've been pretty good offensively prior. But, it's Kirk Ferentz. I don't think Kirk's trying to be disingenuous, but he looks at it from a totally different perspective than a lot of us look at it. And you have to admit that it's only fair to assume that it's likely his stance and his view on this is only exacerbated by the situation, the dynamic with having his son on the staff. I will say this, Brian, in 2 days, Iowa has a new athletic director. So I don't know what that's going to mean. Beth gets, if she ends up getting the full-time job, the permanent job, maybe she'll allow Kirk to continue this if say this season doesn't go as planned and Brian doesn't meet the marks again and Kirk wants to keep him on. Maybe Beth will tip her cap to him. I don't know. But I think a lot of this, you can just keep going up the ladder, and Gary Barta has been at the forefront of so many of these issues, and he is no longer going to be employed at Iowa in 2 days. So we may have seen the last of the enabling and the lack of accountability with the administration.
Well, I will say that something that helped ease my anger last year was right after they had that ridiculous benchmark, the 25 points a game and 7 wins. It took about 7 seconds for somebody to be online selling Iowa football 25-7 T-shirts. And I don't know if that was you guys, but whoever it was, it made me laugh. With that, I can't imagine with this team that they're not going to win 7 games and average 25 points a game. I think that they blow the doors off of that. I think that the opportunity to really have a good team, I mean, it feels like there's enough talent on that field, and there's enough softness in the schedule that that even Brian couldn't mess it up.
The-
I will
the-
say that I want to get it done this year though, because it seems like going forward, the next Big Ten championship that comes to Iowa City is going to be much, much harder, right?
Sure, absolutely. With the Big Ten changing, this is the year to do it. That's another big reason why I've put aside my frustrations with Kirk and with Brian and that dynamic because of the situation. And I think personnel wise, this team has a chance to get it done, like you said. I will say this, you're absolutely right, but the 7-win thing is the most, I mean, we could look back at that and we've discussed it at length. That is the most ridiculous, insane parameter I've ever heard of, Don. The fact that
That's a very low bar. That's a low bar.
But remember, it's 7 wins, including a bowl game. They can go 6-6,
Correct.
They can win the American Standard Toilet Bowl up in Detroit, go 7-6, and Brian's met his mark. That's ridiculous. Now, the 25 points per game is a little bit higher, but I agree with Brian. I think both of those will be met with.
Well, let's not forget that includes defensive scoring. That includes all kinds of points that come through the kicking game too. That's a really low bar also. We had years in which our goal was to score 28 points in every game we played. Not to average 25, but to score 28 week in and week out. That's difficult to do. If you do that, you probably do average at least 35 or 40 points a game. Because obviously every now and then you run into a great defense and it's a real strain to score 28. I'll say that in that particular game.
Don, I did want to ask one more directly at you, because you would know this best, which is the other thing that's hard for me with the Hawks is it seems like always those first few games of the season, we come out a little flat. I'm thinking back to the UNI game where we had to win by a blocked field goal, 2 blocked field goals, I think, and
Right.
South Dakota State and on. And a lot of the time Kirk will be talking about how they're still kind of finding their way or working their way through. And as a fan, I look at the programs that are really thriving, that are in, pedal to the metal. And it feels like Nick Saban and company are not still trying to figure out what they have 2 weeks into the season, but they know what they've got. Is that like just a blue blood royalty thing because the talent's so high there? Or do you see that as kind of a hitch in the giddy up for Iowa as well, with them kind of being slow starters? Is that something a regular coach at a typical program is still trying to figure out what they have week 1, week 2, week 3 of the season?
Well, one of the things I always tried to accomplish as a coach, when you approach game 1, you'd like to win the game, but maybe more important than that is you'd like to gain confidence with how you play. Well, let's face it, if you're an offensive player, how can you gain confidence if you don't put up a bunch of points? So our goal was to always make a statement even on game 1. It didn't matter who we were playing. If it happened to be a weak opponent, we always focused on not playing down to their level. We wanted to play up to our level. And if the score got out of hand, then we'd play more players. That's just simply the way we did it. And for that reason, it was not a valid excuse to say, well, we didn't have a lot of offense in. We wanted to be conservative here in game 1 and not beat ourselves. You got plenty of time to prepare in August. That's the whole purpose of August, of course, is to be ready, as Coach Fry used to say, to let them out of shoot number 1. That was one of his expressions. You might recall, generally, we were ready to play in game 1. We were excited about playing. We'd been getting ready for it for a month. And typically, we started pretty fast. And that's not surprising to me because the players were excited about playing someone other than themselves. And we'd had a good bit of time, of course, to prepare for that first game, more than a week. We're working on the game plan preparation at least with a week and a half to go before we play. We're not going to wait until game week because we have the luxury of camp days to be getting ready. So we were always well prepared for game 1.
So in other words, Don, it would be fair to think that Kirk Ferentz, by the time we get to September 1st, should have a pretty good idea of what he has, to a point where we shouldn't necessarily be just seeing vanilla week 1 heading into, not knowing what changes have been made. I mean, if we're going to be seeing some changes, we're going to see those changes week 1. Is that fair?
Let me qualify it in this one regard. the sake of argument, if there's a coaching change involving a coordinator at Utah State, obviously you're a little more in the dark now because you don't know for sure what that new coordinator believes in. But even then, of course, if he coached at San Jose the year before, then you're getting film from San Jose, and you still have an idea of what he believes in from a coaching perspective. You're going to do your homework. You're going to put the word out as best you can to find out what's in that guy's head.
Well, but watching the two side by side, like one thing that Kirk will talk a lot about is we're not going to change a lot. Brian says this a lot. We're not going to change what we do, right? We know who we are, and they just believe that they're going to do the same thing, and that if the players execute, that they'll win the game. When Coach Fry was there, did you see more? Like, would there be more like a change in approach based on who you're playing each week? Or was Coach Fry's teams like that very much too? Like, this is our identity and this is exactly our map. And if the players execute, we'll win.
Good question. We always installed plays from week to week that we'd never run before. That was always part of the next game plan. And the reasons are kind of obvious. If you can execute even at an average level with some of these new plays, they have a great chance to work because they have the element of surprise. Obviously, if you prepare well for what the other team does, then you're not surprised on game day, and you should be able to meet force with force and be able to defend them very, very well. There's something to be said for the element of surprise, and we always tried to have a certain element of surprise from one week to the next.
Well, I won't see it this year because Sam Laporta has moved on. But if I never see that little jailbreak screen to the tight end again in my life, I've seen it enough, because that seemed like the only thing we did last year.
You're talking about
that maybe caught.
Yes, that was a good play for us, so I didn't have any problem with that play. If anything, I wish we'd run it a few more times.
Well,
well, yeah, I'm just saying it was the only. To me, it was the only thing that I saw as a casual fan that really surprised me. Something that seemed different.
Well, Brian, do you want to take a shot at our trivia question for a chance to win Black Keys tickets?
I'll try. I'll do my best.
So, Don, do you want me to give it to him, or you want to give it to him?
You can go right ahead.
Okay, Brian. So the trivia question that Coach Patterson gave to us is Iowa played BYU and Heisman Trophy winner Ty Detmer to a 13-13 tie back in 1991. So the question here is, this is a tough one. Who caught Ty Detmer's last college football pass?
I haven't a clue. I have not a clue. You can, but you know, the whole time that you're saying that, I think I'm going to get this. It's Ty Detmer, and then it's BYU, and then you kept knocking out my answers. I even knew it was 13-13, but I don't know. You stumped me.
We had to make one that was semi-difficult to just Google and find. So, Brian, if you come up with the answer, feel free to call back.
Sounds good. Good luck on that. Somebody will grab it. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
All right, let's go to our next caller. Thank you for calling Hawkeye Hangout here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Who's on the line?
Good Sunday afternoon, gentlemen. This is John.
Hey, John. How are you?
I'm doing good. You had a podcast, and it was one of the incoming freshmen, and he said, my parents are moving 10 to 15 minutes away over in Coralville. My first thought as a parent was, at some point you got to let your kids go and let them walk on their own 2 feet. For the most part, do the parents let the coaches try and accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, or are they in the ears of their sons saying, you know, you should be starting, and that kind of?
That's a good question. Just for some clarification and some context here, Don. John is referring to Alex Moda, who is from Marion. So his parents are apparently moving from Marion to Coralville. That's a good question, though, from John. Don, what do you think?
Well, I don't think we know what their motive is to move down here. I'd like to believe it's a lot more than just to be that much closer to Kinnick Stadium. I'll say this, in recruiting, one of the things you do, of course, is always spend some time thinking about the relationship between parents and recruit. And to be honest with you, if we have what you might refer to as helicopter parents, at some point that's a negative. We want parents. I was always disappointed when this happened. You would have a mom, typically a mom more so than a dad, that would say in private, without their son being in that conversation, they would say, we're so impressed with your program and we're very impressed with the school. The only concern, I'm just not comfortable with my son going this from home. And like that, as a coach, you're tempted to say, well, why didn't you do a better job of raising your son then? Then we wouldn't be in this spot. I'd like to think that parents, if they've been serious about being the best possible parent, I'd like to believe by the time their son graduates from high school, they would have every confidence that he was going to be able to do well, even if he went halfway across the country. If that was the school that he wanted to attend, I'd like to believe he would do well wherever he went. And I'm the same person that jumped on a plane when I was 18 years old and left Texas for West Point, New York. And that's a pretty big adjustment too, but it was an adjustment I was excited about, and it all worked out very well. So parents that are helicopter parents, those are a little bit of a concern, because they might be more involved in what you'd prefer that they were.
And for the record, I know you're not calling Alex Moda's parents helicopter parents because you don't know them, but
no, I don't know at all. I don't know what their motive is, and frankly it's none of my business what their reasons are to move down. But I do know there are certain parents that move great distance to be nearby to their son or daughter when they go to college, and to me, part of the experience of going to college is going away to school. Our own daughter, I wanted her she wanted to be a pharmacy major, and I mentioned when she was a sophomore in high school, Iowa's got a great pharmacy school, and she said, yeah, they do, Dad. And then the next breath she said, theirs is good, Purdue's is even better. Well, I couldn't argue with her, because that's what the evaluations showed. If she could get accepted into Purdue and we could afford to send her to Purdue, I was all for that. That's where she went to school. She got a great education, and it's been paying off every year for her the rest of her life. It will. So it's okay to go away to school. I think it's a healthy thing. What's kind of sad about the situation we're in this country right now, there are all kinds of sons and daughters that are still living at home, and they might be in their late 20s or early 30s. That's unfortunate, because 20 years ago, parents thought, I put you through college, I've done my job, now you're on your own. And obviously they wouldn't turn their back on their child if they had a financial catastrophe to deal with. But in general, college students used to think, I've got to go out and be gainfully employed because my mom and dad have done all they can do. Corey, I bet you felt that way when you were graduating from college. It's time for me to go to work.
Felt that way before that, Don.
Yeah.
Felt that way graduating high school. But not, with that being said, everybody's different. Everybody's
Correct.
different. So, I don't know Alex Moda's parents, John. I do think it's interesting that they're moving from Marion to Iowa City. It's not like they're moving from Minneapolis to Iowa City. You could attend every game living in Marion. So I don't know. Maybe one of his parents got a job in Iowa City. I have no idea. But that's some families are closer than others. But I think, Don, you have a better perspective on it than I do.
Well, we're excited about parents attending every last game, of course, but it's okay if they have to drive a while to get here. That's okay.
It was just something I was curious about. Coach, did Hayden have a good working relationship with Jim Zabel? I heard one time at a team banquet, I think it was him, he said that one thing about Jim Zabel is he never lets the facts get in the way of a good broadcast. Well,
to my knowledge, Hayden and Jim always got along greatly. He was the voice of Iowa football, and I'm sure Kirk has a priority to be on great terms with Gary Dolphin, much as Hayden had a priority of being on great terms with Jim. Jim was loyal to Iowa football through and through, and to my knowledge, I don't know if they ever had a harsh word. They certainly didn't have many. I'm sure of that.
John,
All right.
you want to take a shot at our trivia question for tickets to the Black Keys?
No, thank you. I'm going to pass. I don't go to the state fair, so we'll let somebody else have it.
That's good on you, John. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, guys.
You want to take a shot at our trivia? By the way, to our user in the chat who spoiled the question, and obviously, however you found the answer, whether you Googled it or you knew it and you put it in the chat, I blocked you from commenting for the rest of the show for that. So I don't know if that, again, this is a call-in contest. So I think we'll mix this up, Don. We'll make this a little bit easier for people and a little bit more fair. We'll take our next caller, and then we'll take caller number 5. All right. We'll throw back to the old radio days. Caller number 5 will win 2 tickets to the Black Keys. So let's take our first caller. This will count as caller number 1. And if you want to make a comment in between calls, that's fine. All right, we'll throw back the old radio. Whoa, Lemansky.
Can you hear me? I got you on speakerphone, but I can take it off speakerphone if it helps.
I could hear me. How you doing, sir?
How do I sound?
You sound fine. How are you?
Good. Welcome back, the dynamic duo to Iowa football. Boy, the path ahead looks a lot brighter than it did yesterday because you two guys.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, Lemansky, and thank you for being here.
I've heard so much about realignment, I have a headache. So from the Hawkeye of the storm, it looks like Don did not do realignment and replace you, Corey. So that makes me happy.
Yeah, Don, we didn't talk realignment. You want to provide some thoughts on Colorado going back to the Big 12?
Well, a lot of people wonder why they ever left. Of course, maybe the same people would wonder why Nebraska left for the Big Ten. Also, those two programs were in the Big 12 back then, the Big 8, of course, for so many years, and it seemed like they belonged in the Midwest in terms of travel. And it was a little bit odd that Colorado decided to go to the Pac-12 because I think it probably involved maybe a little more travel than what they were used to in the Big 8. So I don't know. I'm not sure why they went back. I guess they've had only modest success. I'm guessing one reason they went back is maybe their new football coach thought that was a good idea. Maybe other coaches in other sports too. But certainly Colorado is a big part of the history of the Big 8. And I guess the Big 12 also. They were in the Big 12 for a period of time as well.
Corey, I caught your discussion regarding Phil Steele's magazine. So that's what I'm going to refer to because I think it's interesting information that's hard to get a hold of. And it'll lead to a question to Don and even you, Corey. And it's about returning experience. And I haven't had much data historically, but I've had Phil Steele's magazine in my hand for a few years. And what's interesting to me that they have like 5 or 6 categories where they get a grading scale in the Big Ten. And of course, it's seniors returning, juniors, sophomores, number of 2 deeps, which is kind of interesting because it varies in the 2 deep. Like Penn State has no seniors in the 2 deep, but they got 5 starting. But anyway, the Hawkeyes are 4th behind Michigan, Rutgers, and Wisconsin. And Don, and then Ohio State's below Iowa, so your listeners will be interested where Michigan and Ohio State are, and Penn State's right below Ohio State. So the big 3 are right around us. Illinois is second to the bottom, and I've heard people talk about they've lost a lot. So they're second to the bottom in the Big Ten. Nebraska is 4th from the bottom in the Big Ten. Don, talk to me about your own head coaching experience and your time with Hayden. Elaborate on the seasons when you had a lot of experience and maybe the seasons that you don't. How important is it?
It varies, of course, from one team to the next, and I mean, even at Iowa, every team's a different group of players. I would just say this: we always saw ourselves as a developmental program, and certainly Iowa's still a developmental program. And in that regard, I do think we always attached a lot of value to having a guy that had played a lot, even if he wasn't a great player. He knew what to do. He'd been in the fight any number of games, and you knew you could count on him to give you a great effort and to understand how to play. So he wasn't going to make foolish mistakes. That's where the experience comes in. Experience is worthwhile. Having said that, you mentioned Ohio State is a team that's got a lot of young players in their lineup. Young players that are really talented, let's face it. We thought Tim DeWitt was really good even when he was a freshman, and we were right. So he played a lot of football even as a freshman, and, of course, played even more as the years went forward, but he played from day one. And, of course, other players fall in that category too. So you mentioned Rutgers is one of the most experienced teams, right, in the Big Ten? I'm pretty sure that's not going to equate to a lot of wins. If he's an experienced player that has some talent, that's one thing. If he's an experienced player and doesn't have much talent, then that won't get you too far. That helps.
How much both of you, do you have any comment on that, Corey?
No, I don't. I think that's a good comment. And having not been in a position like Coach Patterson, I'd have no idea. I just can tell you that if you're a developmental program, experience helps, right? That's kind of stating the obvious, but I know Iowa State, we had that conversation with Levi Stevenson, the Iowa State guy from SB Nation, and that was one thing he brought up about Iowa State's struggles last year. They lost so much 2 years ago, and although I don't think that's a valid excuse to go from, being a potential 9-win team to winning 4 games, it can really hurt you if you're not developing depth. Losing a bunch of super seniors, especially with the extra COVID year and guys sticking around for 5 or 6 years, that can hurt you. And we've seen that.
And that's all the more reason to play backups when you have a chance, is to keep that pipeline coming.
People on the field, you've already today mentioned about, and I'm going to throw 2 things in my conversation, is that the toughest schedule is, according to Phil Steele, Iowa State's got the 4th toughest schedule, according to him, and Iowa's got the 69th, and they're almost grouped with Oregon and Michigan. I really hope and pray almost that we get quarterbacks on the field. There's no position that's more important than quarterback, and you can't play 2 quarterbacks at a time. So I think that's really key for this year, then when the conference is expanded. So I'm really looking forward to, if we got improvement in all of the positions, let's get a young quarterback out there to make them at ease. I think that's very important. And I think if we don't beat Iowa State, that's a bad omen for the future, even if it is a rivalry game based on what they got returning and some of their problems. But I think this year, with the easier schedule, Don and Corey, this is a great opportunity, and there's no excuses left on the table. And I've been pretty hard on Gary Barta, and I think I've been pretty hard on the Iowa quarterback history, because we didn't have anybody, like you said earlier, Don, if you want to make a change, I guess what I remember is that Kirk didn't want to make a change because he didn't have confidence in his quarterback room. Well, I think we got a pretty good quarterback room. You care to comment on any of those comments?
I think we've got a pretty good quarterback. I don't know that we have a pretty good quarterback room, Don.
I wouldn't give the room credit for being that good yet, because the other guys are simply unproven. Let's face it, the transfer from Wisconsin, I think threw 1 pass at Wisconsin. He wasn't good enough to get on the field last year, and that's not an indictment of him. He was a young player. And, of course, Joey didn't play much either. So, we don't have anybody that's proven much of anything other than Cade. And let's face it, we're fortunate to have Cade out there playing, and we need to do the best we can to protect him. And if we have a chance to get him off the field when the game's in good hands, then we should do it.
By the way, I feel good about Marco Linez, but he also just got here like a month ago.
So, I agree. I like him. He's got a chance to be a really good player too.
Anything else?
And then Phil Steele's, go ahead, excuse me.
No, I was just going to ask if there's anything else.
To wrap it up, Marco Linez does make the list of outstanding freshman quarterbacks across the country. He's recognized. My comment, I guess, to put it in context is, how did we ever know what our quarterback room was before? Because nobody got any playing time. And so in the context of my comment is, let's get some of these younger quarterbacks on the field so we can build something to the future, because I'm going to agree with Corey over many years. The difference in Don's tenure at Iowa and Kirk Ferentz' tenure at Iowa, the offensive side of the ball, in particular, quarterback development, people ready to play, just hasn't been there comparing the two regimes in Iowa football. Hang up and listen to the rest of the show.
Thank you, Lewanski. Appreciate the phone call, sir. You agree with that, Don?
Yes, I do. I think we did a good job of preparing quarterbacks. We were known to always have a good quarterback, and we almost always did. The numbers kind of speak for themselves.
All right, let's see if we can give away some tickets to the Black Keys. And if we don't get a whole lot of enthusiasm for this, we'll have to figure out a home for the other two. Caller number 5 wins 2 tickets to the Black Keys. So I guess I said earlier that Lewanski counted as caller number 1. So if you're interested in free tickets to see a great modern rock group in the Black Keys at the Iowa State Fair Grandstand, call 515-635-1601. 515-635-1601. All right, let's go to our caller on StreamYard. OS for Hawks is with us. How you doing, sir?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
I had my mic muted. I apologize.
You are fine.
Good afternoon, Corey, and good afternoon, Coach. I just wanted to say I apologize if some of the information that I put in the chat was inappropriate earlier, Corey.
What did you put in the chat? I didn't see anything that inappropriate.
Well, no, I just put in there was some sad news. I'm from the hometown of Jared DeVries. I live in that area. Jared's young son, Easton, passed away on Friday. The young man had a heart condition from birth. There was an unfortunate accident in June, and there were some complications since then. And he had a procedure done this week in Iowa City, and unfortunately, he passed away Friday.
Well,
that's what I put in there. So I just
first of all, I appreciate you calling in and explaining that. And the only reason I didn't put it, I did see the comment, I didn't put it up on the screen because I just wanted to make sure we could validate that before I had heard that he was in the hospital. And I do appreciate you talking about that. And Don, had you heard that? You and I hadn't discussed it.
Yeah,
I was aware. Yes.
Well, I not to validate myself, but I know Jared's parents very well. So, I actually talked to Jared's mother yesterday morning. But anyway, just beyond that, let's get back to football. I just wanted to mention a couple things. I did have a guess on the trivia question, but unfortunately, I saw what was posted in the chat. I did know the name, but I had an inkling because I remembered the game that I knew that where the pass went, and I'm not going to say any more than that, Coach.
You can
Sorry.
You can say the answer now, as for Hawks.
No, I don't. I didn't know the guy, so I couldn't have answered the question. I just knew that it was interception. That's the extent of what I knew. I didn't know who it was, so I couldn't have answered it anyway. One of my points I wanted to bring up again is I am looking forward to this season because I think Iowa has a chance of having a great season. And again, being an old offensive lineman back in my day, which was a long time ago, I believe that the big key for us this season is offensive line play. I think if we could make a marked improvement over last year, I think it could be a really special year. That being said, I'm also am I'm still high on our defense. I think we're going to have a great defensive line. I think the defensive backfield is going to could be unbelievable. I mean, maybe Wampa, Cooper DeJean. I'm just saying that there are so many positive things going into the season about this team, and I appreciate your show. I love watching, and that's really all I had to say.
Well,
you gentlemen have a good evening.
First of all, can I've asked you this before, and I apologize. What's your first name?
My actual first name is Tim.
Okay. Tim, if you're interested in the Black Keys tickets, give us a call on our phone line.
Yeah, no, I couldn't go anyway. Not to go anyway. I'm a caregiver for my elderly mother, and I can't get away for stuff like that. So,
well, good for you. Where may I ask what part of are you in Iowa?
Yeah, I live close to Jared's hometown, Appleton, Parkersburg area.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. I live in that area. So anyway,
well, thank you again, for calling in, and I appreciate you giving that information and confirming that for us. So we'll talk to you next time, sir. Thank you, Tim.
Yep. You have a good evening. Thank you.
You too. Brandon Burr in the chat. I second Marco at QB. True rare dual threat quarterback that will run for first downs when the play breaks down. Brad Banks 2.0. Hopefully. A few questions here in the chat, Don. Esther says, when will the season start? Well, that's an easy one. I think either one of us can answer that question. September 2nd, they'll open up at home against Utah State. Brian wants to know if you think we'll go 13 personnel with all set outside given his athleticism.
I would hope that'll be one of the things we do. Absolutely. To be as multiple as you can with personnel groupings makes you a little more difficult to defend. So, yes, I'd like to see 3 tight ends out there at one time. You bet. We can do things out of that formation.
Are getting the Phil Steele magazine now that we know he really loves the Hawkeyes this year. Yeah, he did. I'm trying to remember the data that Mark gave me, but I believe Phil Steele went on Mark's show and said that in his magazine, and he's, of course, been doing college football preview magazines forever, he's got Iowa as one of, I think, the number one improving offense in the country, or at least the number one improving pass offense. One of the two. I'm getting one of those confused, but that doesn't mean that they're the best. They're going to be the best, but improvement, Don.
Is he just talking about the numbers from one year to the next? Is that what he's saying?
I believe so. Let's get to our call line. Thank you for calling Hawkeye Hangout. Who's on the line?
Hey, Corey, Don, it's Kyle from Cedar Rapids.
Hey, Kyle. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Doing good.
Can Don hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Kyle.
How you doing, Coach?
I'm doing as well as I can be expected at my advanced age.
That's good to hear. Well, I wasn't planning on calling, but I just figured calling talk. And when just getting closer to fall camp, when does fall camp even start?
I think it's Wednesday, isn't it?
I think so.
I know that purely because I know that's when Iowa State's fall camp starts, and I'm pretty sure they're all lined up.
Oh, all right. I was just wondering, before I get to football, I'm going to ask you a non-football related question. It's actually today I went to see Oppenheimer and Feeders. Have you seen Oppenheimer yet?
I have not.
I have not, but I'd like to. I think. Tell me if I should see it.
Well, if you can manage to sit for the whole movie in 3 hours, which I did without going to the bathroom, yeah, I think I recommend it. I also saw Barbie, and I figure I'm not going to spoil the movie, but they're good movies. But if I had to pick one, probably going to have to go with Barbie.
That suggests I'm not going to see either one then.
Don, have you seen Barbie?
No.
Will you see Barbie?
No.
Should we give away tickets to see Barbie?
Not on my account.
Okay. But Kyle, you said it was a good movie though, so it's good to know.
Oppenheimer?
Oh, Barbie.
Yeah,
I'm talking about Barbie.
No, Barbie was really good. I was really impressed by it. Actually, Monday, I actually wrote like a fan letter to Margot Robbie, Greta Gerwig, the director of the movie, and one of the supporting cast, America Ferrera. I'm really know how to pronounce their last name, telling them I was actually really impressed with it. And hopefully I get a response back from each of them and hopefully an autograph to come with it.
There you go.
All right, let's get to football.
Okay.
There's this one question I've been meaning to ask both of you. I'll start with Don. Who's the one player you'll be paying attention to during camp?
Good question.
Only one? If I could only pay attention to one? I
Yeah.
believe that would be Cade McNamara, because he's got so much to do with our success on offense.
I'll tell you who it is for me, Don.
Okay.
It's Caleb Brown.
That's a good choice. You know, in my notes, I had this down, Corey. I'm talking about personnel. I'll just read to you what I said. Either Caleb Brown or Seth Anderson needs to be an impact player at receiver. Guys need to be an impact player. And that simply means we need help, wide receiver. And not to pick on the guys that are already here, but we need one more new guy at that position to give us a boost.
Absolutely. I need that star player receiver. For my one player I'm paying attention to in camp, it's not on the offensive side, it's in the defense, and that is Jamari Harris. I'm going with Jamari because when I saw him like 2 seasons ago, he played well, had 4 interceptions, but last year they never saw him at all with this suspension and the injury, and I was kind of speculating he was going to transfer, but decided to stick around and trying to earn that role back. And it'll be pretty interesting for me to watch, because if he's going to be still the same player I saw 2 years ago, or is he going to be rusty? But I'm hoping he's still got it and he can provide help again on that defense again. You agree with that?
Let me make one comment, Corey, if I can, about that. I do think it's critical. You've heard me say it before, Corey. Having one great corner is not enough. You have to have 2 guys, because obviously if you have one great corner, they'll simply work on the other corner. And the same thing you could say to wide receivers. As a bare minimum, you got to have a second receiver. There can't be just one, because one's going to get doubled all day long. And if the other guys can't perform, then obviously you're not going to be able to make much headway by going to that best receiver that's doubled every snap of the game.
And we don't know that Jamari Harris is going to be great. That's been my one big thing with the defensive backfield. I'm high on Cooper DeJean. I'm high on Xavier Wampa, although we haven't seen a ton of Xavier Wampa either. But I think he's ready, and we've seen Quinn Schulte show out. Jamari Harris hasn't played in over a year. I haven't played in almost 2 years. So, I mean, he might be good. He might not be. I mean, we just have to wait and see. And I would not be surprised if TJ Hall gets some time. I wouldn't be shocked to see Jamison Hines get some time. Deshaun Lee's on the depth chart as well. And we'll see if Brendan Diaz-Fernandez or AJ Lawson ever play. But I think that's a position to watch and a battle to watch, because I would doubt that Phil Parker would declare Jamari Harris as the absolute starter as of right now. I think there's still a battle going on there.
Yeah, I agree. I get what Don was saying, like having 2 great corners, but I just felt like that was my guy. I needed to keep an eye on Jamari, just because I really thought about it for a while and decided I really need to pay attention to him, see if he can be good again.
Absolutely. Kyle?
I don't have much. Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I was just to say, anything else?
No, I think that's all I got. I don't have much to say except for that.
Well, thank you for calling in, Kyle, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, bye.
Thank you, sir. Well, Don, we're not getting calls for our black. I don't understand this. By the way, these tickets are $156 value. So, tell you what, we're gonna have to give them away on Twitter. So, I've done this before. I gave away tickets. What do we say? Gave away tickets to see the Good Guys car show down at the Iowa State Fair here, I think last month. Apparently, our 120 some listeners are interested in going to this concert, just like the listeners weren't interested in the Good Guys. I don't understand that, so we'll give them away to people who follow us on Twitter. So that is okay. Lemansky, appreciate the super chat. I'm guessing doing business with the sponsors could be the lifeblood of your show. Certainly appreciate that, Lemansky, and your donations, your generosity is much appreciated as well. So thank you for that super chat, Lemansky. Before we get to some comments from the chat, questions that I figure we should hit. I do want to address the kind of the question that Kyle just brought up. He asked about specific players to watch for this fall camp. Don, is there a specific position battle that you're watching for this fall that you think is noteworthy enough to say you're following a battle? And for me, it's without question, it's going to be the wide receiver battle. But is there a specific position you're looking at?
Well, I'm looking at the battle to see who the number 2 quarterback is going to be. That's important. But I guess you'd have to say more important, we have a battle at left guard, as I understand it. It looked like it might be Cody, and now maybe not. So I'm just glad to know that we have competition, spirited competition at certain positions. And because obviously it's a long season, and before the year plays out, you typically need both of them. So glad to know we got competition at more than just a few positions.
And Don, I wouldn't limit it to just left guard. I'd almost say every position on the offensive line except left tackle and center. To me, I perceive all of those positions as of right now being up for grabs. And in case you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll read you the depth charts as they currently stand according to the preseason depth chart. So, of course, Richmond, he's your left tackle. Barring something injury-related, he's there. Jack Dotzler backing him up. But you mentioned Nick DeYoung, Connor Colby battling it out at left guard. Logan Jones, I think, is pretty much set at center with Tyler Ellsbury also listed there. But I think Tyler, he could end up, competing at one of the guard spots as well. And then you got Bo Stevens and Rusty Feth. That's going to be a battle to follow at right guard, Don, because Rusty's very experienced at Miami, Ohio. Bo was good at times last year. He's actually... Would you have guessed, Don, that he and Jennings Dunker are the 2 heaviest linemen listed on the depth chart? Bo Stevens listed at 6'6", 319, Dunker at 6'5", 320. And then at right tackle, you've got Jennings Dunker being backed up by Dejon Parker. I think that's as equally as intriguing of a battle. Dejon transferring over from Saginaw Valley, and he missed the spring due to injury. But if he's healthy, I could see him emerging at right tackle.
Yeah, that's encouraging. What appears to be 3 positions in the O-line that are up for grabs. And somebody that played last year is now in competition with somebody that's new to the team in so many cases. So that's a good sign.
And I thought there were times, like I said, I brought up Tyler Ellsbury. I thought there were times last year where Ellsbury was at guard where he looked really good. So, he's listed as your backup center right now. But they've got plenty of bodies. And I just... If it doesn't work now, I don't know when it's going to work, Don.
Right.
So this is obviously an integral. That whole offensive line battle will be an interesting one to follow throughout fall.
And so many of those O-line bodies you're talking about are, in many cases, 4th and 5th year players.
Right. And Dennis brings up, Rusty has played center, so he would be an option there if something happened to Logan Jones and they were more comfortable with Rusty over a guy like Michael Muslinski or even Tyler Ellsbury. A couple questions here in the chat. Brandon wants to know, do you see our offensive line improving back to the levels when we had Tristan Wirfs? Your thoughts?
Tristan's another example. The beauty of Tristan playing right tackle is, the guy he's assigned to block, he's going to block him all day long. The big question, of course, what about the other 4 guys? How are they going to hold up? So I don't even honestly recall that our entire offensive line when Tristan played was that good. I'm not sure they were. Maybe they were better than what we've had in last 2 years. So I definitely see improvement in our offensive line because we have more experienced players. I pointed out one time before, though, Corey, people are always excited by talking about the fact that guys are going to be bigger, stronger, faster than a year ago. The dirty little secret is those guys we're playing against, if they come back from last year, they're going to be bigger, stronger, faster also. So the question ultimately is, who gains an edge by making more progress than the opponent? If your guys make more progress than the team you're playing, then obviously you'll win the day, or at least you have a better chance to win the day. So that's why it's always got to be in the head of the players. Unless you're certain that you outworked your opposition today, then you didn't do the job as well as you should have. Because you need to have great confidence when you put your head on the pillow at night that you got more done today than your opponent. That's ultimately what an offensive lineman should be thinking.
And Don, Steve brings up Hayden Large, the experiment of Hayden Large at fullback. He's 6'5". What is he listed at weight wise? He's listed at 250. Don, is that 6'5"? Is that the tallest fullback you've ever
Yes.
seen?
You've heard an expression, Corey, about football, low man wins. You've heard that, right?
Yep.
That typically applies to fullbacks.
So are you concerned about that? Or is that?
Yes, because he clearly is not going to have low pad level. Some of the best fullbacks I ever saw were no taller than 6 feet.
So I'm just curious, what do you think that from what you saw in the spring, what do you think Kirk, and I don't know, maybe you asked Kirk this question, but what did they see in Hayden Large that you think that'd be a good, I'm going to write that. That's a good question to ask Kirk at Media Day, but what do you think they saw in Hayden Large that made them think that he could play fullback?
Good question, because he's not the typical frame of a fullback. You don't see too many fullbacks that are that tall. Again, low man wins. In most cases, you're talking about a fullback isolating on a linebacker. That's a huge collision. And if that linebacker's underneath your pads, then you're going to be stuck right there in that hole we were hoping to be able to run through. So
So let me ask you this, Don. Why do you typically see offensive linemen that are 6'2" or taller? Why aren't there 5'10" offensive linemen?
Well, up to a point, low man wins. If you're a midget out there playing, you're gonna be the low man, but you're not gonna move a guy that's got all kinds of mass over you. You make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 5'10" linemen simply can't pack enough weight and enough strength onto that frame. 5'10" linemen that are tough and hard nosed, they're the guys that are playing fullback because they only weigh 240.
Is it fair to say the Hayden Large experiment could work, and it could also work in the passing game?
Yeah, I was going to say, the thing I noticed from the spring game is he appears to have pretty good hands.
Yes, he does.
So, and we throw the ball to the fullback some, not a lot, I'll admit. But when you factor in the fact that he's not out all day long, the percentages go up a little bit. So there are passes that are designed to go to the fullback. And Hayden proved to me, even in that one day, that he could catch a ball out of the backfield.
All right, Cole. Nebraska, he says Nebraska's fullback is 6'2", 220. Iowa's is 6'5", 250. So pretty substantial difference there, I would say. But what do I know? Hawk Knot says, if Cade saves Brian Ferentz's job, will he be back next season? Well, I don't know if you're talking about Brian or Cade. I'm assuming he's talking about Cade. If Cade has an exceptional year, Don, I think he could try to make the jump to the pros. I think that's probably his ultimate goal. But I don't know if he's good enough for that. Do you have thoughts on Cade's?
I guess the one thing I don't know, as far as his clock goes, is this his fourth year in the fall? The fourth year starts? Or is it his fifth year?
This is he has, I believe if he were to get a medical, he could actually be here 3 years. But he's definitely got 2.
Okay. Well, frankly, it just depends on how well he plays. He's got to play really well. So we're saying that if he comes out next year, then he's coming out early. For a guy like him to come out early, you better know what you're doing.
Yep.
Because if you're disappointed on draft day, then you've already put your cards on the table, so you don't have a chance to make it better next year.
Brandon says, I haven't heard, but is Cade and Eric healthy? Of course, Cade had the knee issue, Eric with his bad back. By all accounts, they are both healthy, Brandon. So
I do believe so.
The knee and the back hold up throughout fall camp, because fall camp is rigorous, Don. I mean,
yes, it is.
It's amazing. These players they're living in a hotel room for a month, right? That's how this.
Right.
For anybody who doesn't know that, that's what fall camp is. They're still in Iowa City, but they're in a hotel for a month. They don't have very little contact with the outside world. It's a rigorous thing. Now, Jakob wants to know, do you miss fall camp as a coach, Don?
It's a grind for the coaches, too. If you can imagine back in the old days, we had two-a-days back in those days. There are no more two-a-days. But if you can imagine this, we had 20 practices in 11 days. In other words, we had two-a-day, 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 two-a-day. Thank God for Sunday. Sunday shows up, no practice. And then Monday, you're right back to more two-a-days to finish up. So you had 10 double sessions in 11 days. And there was one Sunday in there that gave you a chance to recover a little bit. That was grueling, to say the least. That was really difficult. There were more practices before the first game back then than there are now. I think now, I believe it's 29 practices, but only one a day, never two in any single day. So That was difficult.
Real quick.
In that regard, I don't miss two-a-days because it is an absolute grind.
So tell us now, Don, is it 6 days a week or 7 days a week? As of
It's
right
7 days. It's 7 days a week for the coaches, and for the players too. In so many ways, even if they're not practicing 7 days a week, they're meeting if they're not practicing. I would imagine.
Right. Okay. James wants to know, other than defensive line, running backs, what positions do you feel were deepest at? Tight end was one.
Yeah.
I feel pretty good about safety, Don, because I like Xavier Wampin, I like Quinn Schulte, and I do think the coaches have confidence in Sebastian Castro. If they need to pull him back, who plays cash? Would they move DeJean down? Then that puts into question your depth at corner. I'm not worried about safety. Other than that, I'm not real confident in a ton of depth anywhere else. But they have a lot of personnel on the offensive line. We'll just see if they can pan out.
I agree.
Kenton wants to know, he says, I'm pumped for the season, Coach. Is it okay to be excited, or am I setting myself up for disappointment?
No, I don't think you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Let me touch on the schedule for a minute here, Corey. I don't think we'll ever have a much more favorable schedule than what we have this year. Only one opponent finished last season in the top 25. That's Penn State. They finished number 9. Only 5 of our opponents had winning seasons last year. And 3 of those teams have to play in Kinnick. That would be Purdue, Minnesota, and Illinois. If you want to talk about a key game, it's really not Penn State. I would classify, if you had to label one game as the key game, it would be at Wisconsin, because Wisconsin has a schedule similar to ours. They do have to play Ohio State, but they get them in Camp Randall. We have to go to Penn State, so neither one of us have a great percentage on that game, probably. Most bettors are going to pick Ohio State to win in Madison and pick Penn State to beat us in Happy Valley. So in that regard, that head-to-head game when we go to Camp Randall is critical, because think of it this way. If we both lose to Penn State and Ohio State, then obviously what matters the most, of course, is how well you fare in the West. And when you lose to another team in the West, obviously it's not going to be enough for you to tie them. Unless it's a 3-way tie and you all beat each, a possibility. But in general, when you lose to someone, it means you need to beat them in the final standings. You can't be tied with them, because if it comes down to head-to-head, they win. So that's why the game is so important against Madison.
And Don, since you brought up the schedule, we can go ahead and kind of look at this. And we talk about how favorable it is. You talk about Utah State in week 1, an Iowa State team that's coming off a 4-8 year. Western Michigan, a MAC school Iowa should handle in Kinnick. And then, of course, at Penn State on CBS. Michigan State was down last year. We'll see if I know you like Mel Tucker, but boy, bad year for them last year. Purdue's got a new coaching staff. They're at Wisconsin. They've got a new coaching staff. They get Minnesota, a team they've dominated. Iowa's dominated the Florida-Rosedale series of late. They get them in Kinnick. You've got Northwestern and Wrigley Field. There are going to be more Iowa fans there than Northwestern fans, home of the Cubs. And keep in mind, Pat Fitzgerald's gone. We haven't talked about that yet here, Don. Rutgers at home, Illinois at home, Nebraska on the road. That's about as favorable as you could possibly draw it up. Now, that being said, Wisconsin also has a very favorable schedule. They get Wisconsin gets Ohio State at home, and I believe they have Rutgers and Indiana, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's a pretty favorable 3 crossover games. So, anyways, the schedule shapes up for Iowa to have a 9 to. If Iowa has anything less than a 9-win year, in my opinion, that's a major disappointment. If they go 8-4 with that schedule, Don, I'm disappointed. Given the fact that they went out and got Cade McNamara and did these different things, I'm disappointed with 8-4 or less.
Absolutely.
Brandon says, do you see similar things happening to Wisconsin with the new coach and system, like what Michigan did years ago with Rich Rod, bringing in the spread that did not work?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why. First off, I do have a lot of respect for Luke Fickell. I think he's an outstanding coach. And the listener may not be aware, the offensive coordinator is a guy named Phil Longo. Phil Longo was the OC for Mac Brown at North Carolina and put up some outstanding numbers. They averaged almost 500 yards a game in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and they still ran the ball well too. So I think what you're going to get, I think what Wisconsin fans can look forward to is greater balance than what they've had in the past. In the past, they were run heavy. There's no doubt you're going to see this year out of Wisconsin the whole year. But I say that's a good thing. And you heard me say, Corey, we used to sell this to our recruits on offense. We had the kind of offense that could run for 300 one weekend and throw for 300 the very next. I'm afraid that Wisconsin might turn into that kind of team because their coaches do know about pass offense, and they've got a transfer at quarterback, and the name might not mean much to you, but Mordecai is his name. What's his first name, Corey? Tanner Mordecai. What concerns me a little bit as an Iowa fan, he's a transfer that came from SMU, but you need to realize that Luke Fickell at Cincinnati played SMU, and he had a good look at Tanner Mordecai, and if he wants him to play quarterback for him, that suggests to me that he's going to be a good one. He was highly recruited years ago, and he certainly has a chance to be a good quarterback for the Badgers.
Different animal playing quarterback in the Big Ten than playing quarterback in the American Conference. I mean, we recognize that, Don, right?
Yes. But I did see that Fickell commented the strength of his offense, he said, was his offensive line. So if he's going to get great support out of an O-line, that gives any quarterback a chance to be better.
And he's got a good running back as well. I'll say this about Tanner Mordecai. Go ahead, Don. You don't like Braylon Allen?
Oh, I absolutely like the backs. I like the backup even. The backup running back's good also. What I'm not sure about is their strength at receiver. I don't know much about the receivers. You probably know them better than I do.
I know they've had some attrition, and they just had a receiver enter the portal here within the last few weeks. So, yeah, that'd probably be a question mark for them. Mordecai struggled in the one open spring practice. I know that was kind of blown out of proportion.
I did hear that.
Huge numbers at SMU. A couple of things here in the chat here. Sam says, how much of an influence will Kirk have in the hiring of the next head coach, assuming he steps down next year? That's a big assumption. Will Brian be in the discussion if the contract stipulations are met?
I have my doubts.
I have my doubts on that as well. I would not think Kirk has a great say in the hire of the next coach. But am I wrong?
I think that might be especially true because we've got to change at AD.
Absolutely. If Gary Barta were still part of this decision, who knows? But that's not the case. Brandon says, is Eric All and Kate? Okay, we think we took this question already. T. Hink says, what do you want to be ranked this year for offense? Where do you think is an ideal rank? If we're talking like ranking across the country, total offense, passing offense, what's the best data point to look at, Don?
Well, if you want to be realistic, I guess if I had to go with one stat for the offense, even scoring offense, it's kind of misleading because defensive scores go into those stats, right? All they really care about is how many points did the team put up. And I would say if I had to pick one stat for the offense, I guess I'd put scoring offense because obviously you got to make points. And a realistic goal, I think, is to be in the top half at least. To do that, we'd certainly be averaging a lot more than 25. We'd probably be averaging 30, I would think, to be in the top half. I do recall that averaging 25 points last year, as I recall, it put you maybe 85th or something out of 130. You're still below half, even if you average 25 points. So if we really want to aspire to make a big jump, I'd like to think we could average at least 30 points a game. That's a lot to ask based on our low numbers of the last 2 years.
Steve says, is Illinois now a tough out? I can answer that question. Absolutely. And I think they're going to be a tough out every year that Brett Bielema is there. Rough Rider returns. Will Wisconsin or Nebraska show the most improvement before 24? Again, personnel-wise, I think you got to go with Wisconsin, but I'm high on both Matt Rule and Luke Fickell, Don. Yeah,
let me share with people what they might not realize. Matt Rule at Baylor, think about that. Well, first off, I knew Matt Rule as a head coach when he was at Temple because I was at UConn and we were playing Temple. And I remember being very impressed with the way he brought that Temple program along. Incidentally, they won 2 divisional titles and they won 1 American Athletic Conference title. I think he was only there for 3 years, as I recall. He was there one time before as a coordinator, but he came back as a head coach. Here's what was amazing about his 3 years at Baylor. In year one, they won 1 game. In year two, they won 7. In year three, they won 11. 11-3, and all 3 losses were quality losses. 2 of them were close games, lost to Oklahoma. One was in the Big 12 championship game after barely losing to them in the regular season. And the third loss was, I believe, in the Sugar Bowl, as I recall, against somebody like Georgia, I think. I can't remember who they played. But he's an outstanding coach. Everywhere he's been, he's impressed me with the way he does things. He's a good person. I have no doubt that he's going to do well at Nebraska. I just hope he doesn't do well at our expense. There's no doubt Nebraska is going to become improved. If they give him half a chance to do it, he'll get it done.
Lomansky clarifies my statement earlier. So Phil Steele's got Iowa as the most improved offense as far as points per game is concerned across the board. That's somewhat eye-popping when that was brought to my attention the other day. Thank you for the super chat, Lomansky. And Underway Shift Colors says, is there anybody else curious about now the Bard is out of the picture? How will the Swarm Collective, how will this be able to impact the Hawks in the future? Absolutely. We're going to have Brad Heinrichs on. We'll try to get him on next month at some point. And we'll talk NIL and we'll talk about the future. Folks, I want to make a special announcement. I think I probably talked about it, frankly. Iowa postgame with Coach Don Patterson is returning in 2023. Don, this has been a pleasure the last 2 years, and the last 2 hours have gotten my juices flowing for another year of postgame coverage. So thank you for coming back another year. I know fans are looking forward to it. I've gotten so many emails and people reaching out about how much they enjoy hearing your insight over even the last month. And of course, if you're interested in sponsoring, reach out to me. You can reach out to me at FromTheEyeOfTheStorm@Outlook.com. FromTheEyeOfTheStorm@Outlook.com. Don, is there anything I missed regarding fall camp things? I know we didn't really talk a whole lot of analytics. I'll give you the floor here. If you want to share something regarding analytics, I know you've been working on these ad nauseum. You can't go into too much detail because some of this stuff is going to be left for the coaches, but anything we missed during our show today?
Sure. I'll be happy to touch on analytics a little bit. I'll begin by saying this, Corey. I don't think in my 8 years of doing analytics for 10, I've been a year in which analytics would appear to be more beneficial than what they are for this upcoming season based on last year's analytics. Let me explain a little bit. It's pretty amazing to know this. And the only concern I got is because of the NIL, because of the transfer portal, because of any number of coaching changes, my fear is that the analytics won't hold up as well as they have in recent years. Having said that, if they hold up as well as I think they're going to hold up, it's kind of amazing how much you can learn by really crunching numbers in a million different ways. And that's what I do, as you know. Let me just give you an example. Individual parameters, Corey, as you know, I look at 25 different parameters and I ask the question in all 64 games, who won the parameter, who won the game? And what you want, of course, is a high correlation of winning. And there were 17 parameters that came in at 70% all the way up to 83%. The highest single parameter was at 83%. That's pretty reliable. You win the parameter, you win the game 83% of the time. That's one parameter that'll remain nameless right now. As you know, I then take those parameters that are the most reliable and I figure up all available combinations involving those parameters. This year, typically I go with the top 15. This year I expanded it to the top 17. There are 136 combinations involving those 17 parameters. I've looked at all 136 combinations in all 64 games. 1 year earlier, last summer, Corey, I found one combination that was 100% win. This summer, I found 8 parameters that were 100% win. If you won these specific 2 parameters, you won the game. There were 8 different combinations that worked at 100%. Now, here's the next step. You look at that and you try to get an evaluation. Okay, that's nice to know, but can we come up with a prediction model that's simple enough that the players can actually remember those parameters that are involved in the prediction model? the typical prediction model, Corey, and typically it's 4 different parameters. You have to win a majority of the 4 to be guaranteed to win the game. That prediction model, most years, check in maybe at 95% reliable. I didn't know if I'd ever find one that's done what one does this year. I looked at a 5-parameter model, and in those 5, if you won a majority of those 5 parameters last season, looking at all 64 games, your record, if you went off those 5 parameters, nothing but 5, your record would have been 58 wins and 0 losses. 58-0. That leaves room for 6 ties. Now, you know a lot about parameters, Corey, and a simple example would be turnover margin. You might end up even on turnovers. Well, if you're even on turnovers and turnover margin happened to be one of those 5 parameters, and here's a real bombshell. Yes, it is one of those 5 parameters. That doesn't shock you because you know a lot about turnover margin. That's the only one I'm divulging. But the amazing thing is that to just win, and you don't have to win all 5, as you know, Corey, you just need to know what they are. Let's face it, the best chance we have to win those turnovers if we know which ones are most important. And I'm confident that the players are going to know what those 5 parameters are. And the beauty of all that, if you win 3 of the 5, any 3 of the 5, based on an entire season of football last fall, you're guaranteed to win the game. 58 wins and no losses. Think about that. That's pretty amazing. Now, I will admit, some teams won all 5 of them. Well, yeah, those were the blowout games. Those games typically involved Ohio State or Michigan beating up on someone else. There were a few of those, of course, but there were any number of games where the winning team simply had a +1 edge on those parameters. They won 3, the other team won 2, and that was enough to swing it your way. So that's what's exciting to me. 5 parameters can identify the winner in every case. Now, one last thought. Let me let you think about this. After I came up with this prediction model that's 58-0, the next question, of course, is will it actually hold up this fall? Well, to kind of put it to the test, so to speak, I simply took the prediction model I came up with last summer and applied it to games we played last fall because I was curious, how well did that work? The prediction based on the previous season is that prediction model would produce 56 wins and 3 losses. Last fall, when I looked at that model and ran it through all 64 games, the final record was 56 wins and 4 losses. It was off by 1 game. So prediction models do work. That's my point. And they
hold true, typically.
They do hold true. I do recognize, I've already acknowledged it, maybe because of the transfer portal and NIL and so many coaching changes, maybe it won't hold true. But we're going to find out, and you can bet as soon as it's not holding true, the Iowa football staff will know about it because I'll give them the alert as soon as it happens. And that's the knowledge than the opponent. And we're going to be sure that our players have more knowledge than the opponent does.
Well, Don, I can speak for Hawkeye Nation and extending my appreciation. Thank you for the last couple of hours, and thank you in advance for another very fun season. It's going to be fun to get back into Kinnick and to be able to get back on this show with you and to be able to talk to fans. And thank you for helping us break down fall camp. We got about a month to go. We'll have media day, tons of coverage here on the channel, and we'll talk to you on September 2nd.
We'll have a lot to look forward to. I think it might be more interesting than most seasons, that's for sure.
A reminder, folks, support our sponsors. Lemansky brought that up earlier. They're in the description, and you can also sign up for a free trial of Aura. Protect your information. Visit www.aura.com/Hawkeyes. You can find that link in the chat and in the description below. When you sign up for free trial, you're supporting our show here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Don, stay cool. Get shaven here in the next month, and we'll talk to you in September.
Next time you see me, Corey, I promise I'll be clean shaven.
Thanks, Coach.